You say I'm crazy. You say I'm crazy.
The stage was bathed in crimson light. A low hypnotic bass line pulsed through the air, and from the shadows emerged a figure draped in silk, shimmering like liquid moonlight. The crowd roared not just because this was Sam Smith, the Grammy-winning voice behind Stay With Me and Unholy, but because they were witnessing something rare in music, an artist standing fully, unapologetically, in their truth. But Sam's journey to that moment was far from effortless. Years earlier, behind award show smiles and chart-topping singles, there was a quiet ache, a private battle between the person the world adored and the person they truly were. Long before they declared to the world, "My pronouns are they, them," Sam had endured the suffocating weight of invisibility, the pressure to fit a mold that was never meant for them. There were whispers in the industry. Tone it down. Be careful how you dress. Don't alienate the mainstream. And yet, beneath the glitter and the high notes, Sam knew that denying their own identity was a slow form of erasure. The real turning point wouldn't come in a glamorous music video or an arena show. It would come in a quiet, personal moment, one that would change everything. In a 2019 interview, Sam's voice trembled slightly as they confessed. "I feel just as much a woman as I am a man." It wasn't a marketing strategy. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a release, a truth, set free after years of silence. For some, it was revolutionary. For others, it was controversial. And for Sam, it was simply survival. This is not just a story about a voice that could fill stadiums. It's a story about a child from a small English town who felt the sharp sting of not belonging. About a young artist told to hide their heart in order to sell their art. About a human being who risked everything to sing, dress, and live as themselves. So who really is Sam Smith, beyond the headlines, the awards, and the shifting styles? What sacrifices were made in the shadows? And what battles still rage behind the spotlight? And perhaps most importantly, how does one find freedom in an industry built on illusion? In the next chapters, we will walk alongside Sam from their earliest days in Bishop Stortford to the dizzying heights of global fame. We will step into the recording booth where Stay With Me was born, and into the solitary moments when even a #1 single could not quiet the noise inside. We will uncover the loves kept secret, the identities questioned, the public highs and private lows. And we will ask the question that lingers in every lyric they've ever sung. What does it mean to truly be yourself when the world has already decided who you should be? Because Sam Smith's story isn't just about music. It's about the courage to live without apology. It's about the messy, beautiful, and unending journey of becoming. Sam Smith was born Samuel Frederick Smith on May 19, 1992 in the quiet market town of Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire, England. The town was picturesque red brick houses, narrow streets, and an unhurried pace that seemed a world away from the flashing lights of the global stage they would one day command. Sam's parents, Frederick and Kate, were working class, grounded, and fiercely supportive. Their home wasn't filled with luxury, but it was alive with music. From a young age, Sam's voice seemed to belong to another era, rich, emotive, and startling in its maturity. Family gatherings often turned into impromptu concerts, with Sam singing while relatives listened in awe. Yet while their voice drew admiration, their sense of self was already complex and unspoken. School was a complicated world. Sam was a sensitive child, quick to feel and quicker to empathize. That sensitivity, however, often made them a target. They didn't quite fit into the rigid boxes of boy or girl that classmates seemed to accept without question. The playground could be cruel. Teasing, whispers, and the occasional shove were part of their daily reality. Sam would later recall how the experience planted seeds of doubt, making them question if their differences were flaws to be hidden. At home, there was warmth, but even within that safety, Sam sensed the unspoken rules of the world outside. They learned to navigate between being their true self and the version that might draw less attention. Still, their parents encouraged their musical passions, enrolling them in vocal lessons and supporting every small performance. Sam's mother, in particular, was determined to give her child the chance to chase a dream, even if it meant driving miles for auditions or rehearsals. Music became more than just a hobby, it was an escape. When Sam sang, they could be anyone. The boundaries of gender, identity, and expectation melted away in the music's embrace. The songs they gravitated towards, soul ballads, gospel hymns, and heart-wrenching pop anthems, were often about longing and truth, themes that mirrored their own internal journey. But adolescence brought new challenges. As Sam grew, so did their awareness of their sexuality and gender identity. They knew early on that their attractions didn't fit the traditional narrative. They were quiet crushes on boys, moments of deep connection that had to be buried under layers of secrecy. By the time they were a teenager, Sam understood they were gay, but coming out in a small town felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. There was also something deeper, harder to name at the time. While sexuality could be defined, their sense of gender felt fluid, unfixed. Some days they felt more masculine, others more feminine, and often somewhere in between. It wasn't something they had language for yet, but the feeling was constant. The world, however, had no space for that nuance, not in the early 2000s, and certainly not in the rural English schoolyard. Still, in the quiet moments alone in their bedroom, with headphones on and music turned up, Sam could imagine a life where they didn't have to choose, where their voice, their body, and their heart could exist without contradiction. This inner world became a source of resilience. Even when bullied, even when self-doubt crept in, the dream remained vivid. One day, they would sing their truth to an audience that understood. One day, they would be free. By the time Sam Smith was a teenager, the dream of making music was no longer a vague hope. It was an obsession. They spent hours studying vocal techniques, experimenting with tone, and recording covers in their bedroom. School friends recall that Sam's voice would stop conversations mid-sentence. It wasn't just talent, it was something that made you feel. The first step into the wider world came through local performances, pub gigs, open mic nights, and charity events where Sam would stand nervously before small crowds. Each time, they left the stage with more confidence, more hunger to take the next step. The small-town boundaries of Bishop Stortford could no longer contain their ambition. London was the next frontier. Trips to the city meant auditions, collaborations, and the sobering reality of a music industry that was both dazzling and ruthless. The capital's scene was competitive, overflowing with hopefuls who could sing, write, and charm. Sam quickly learned that talent alone was not enough. You had to fit an image. And for someone like Sam, whose identity was fluid and whose style didn't always conform, that image could feel like a costume. The early years brought both breakthroughs and heartbreaks. In 2012, Sam's voice found its first significant audience through Latch, a collaboration with the electronic duo Disclosure. The song was an intoxicating blend of house beats and emotional vocals, and Sam's performance was its heartbeat. Suddenly, they were on the radar not just of fans, but of labels, producers, and media. With recognition came pressure. Executives loved the voice, but there were murmurs about presentation. Tone down the flamboyance, dress more neutral, keep your private life quiet. It was the unspoken bargain. The industry often offered queer artists, "We'll give you the stage, but only if you play by our rules." Sam played along, at least for a while. The next big moment came in 2013 with La La La, a collaboration with Naughty Boy. The track shot to #1 in the UK, cementing Sam as more than a featured vocalist. They were a star in the making. Invitations to perform poured in, interviews were scheduled, and the machinery of fame began to turn. Yet beneath the rising success, there was a dissonance. Sam had not yet come out publicly. In interviews, questions about love and relationships were deflected or answered in vague terms. The truth was still locked away, shared only with close friends. Fame magnified the pressure. The more the world adored them, the more terrifying it felt to reveal a truth that might change everything. In the studio, Sam poured their unspoken feelings into music. They began working on their debut album, writing about love, heartbreak, and longing with a raw honesty that masked, but did not hide, the reality of their own experiences. They were singing about men, but changing pronouns to fit the expectations of a heteronormative market. It was a compromise that hurt, but one that seemed necessary to survive the early stages of a career. Looking back, Sam would describe those years as a balancing act between authenticity and self-preservation. "I was out to my friends and family," they later admitted, "but not in my music. And that felt like I was holding my breath." The stage was set. The debut album was ready. And while the world was about to hear Sam Smith in a way it never had before, the person behind the voice was still waiting for the right moment to fully emerge. When In the Lonely Hour was released in May 2014, it didn't just enter the music world, it swept through it like a confession whispered in the dark. The album was tender yet powerful, built on themes of unrequited love and vulnerability, carried by Sam Smith's soaring, soulful voice. Stay With Me, the lead single, became an anthem almost overnight, its gospel chords an aching plea for connection striking deep into the hearts of millions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Critics praised the emotional honesty, drawing comparisons to soul greats like Aretha Franklin and Otis Redding. Fans felt as though Sam had reached into their own hidden pains and set them to music. Radio stations played Stay With Me on loop, while late-night talk shows invited Sam to perform under the glare of international spotlight. Awards followed quickly. That same year, Sam was nominated for 6 Grammy Awards and walked away with 4, including Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Best New Artist. It was a staggering ascent. Barely 2 years earlier, they had been performing in small clubs. Now they stood on stage at the Staples Center, clutching gold gramophones, thanking the world in a voice choked with disbelief. But even in the midst of triumph, there was an undercurrent of tension. Much of the public still assumed the love stories in Sam's songs were about women. The truth that In the Lonely Hour had been written about a man who didn't love them back was something Sam kept quietly to themselves at first. It wasn't shame that silenced them, it was fear. Fear of losing this newfound connection with a global audience. Fear that the world wasn't ready to hear the truth from a rising pop star. Behind the scenes, the pace was relentless. Tours, interviews, award shows, it was a blur of hotel rooms, camera flashes, and rehearsals. Sam's schedule was so punishing that their voice, their greatest instrument, began to strain. There were nights when they stepped off stage and could barely speak, their vocal cords pushed to the limit. Still, they pressed on. The success of the album opened doors to collaborations with some of the biggest names in music. In 2015, they recorded Writings on the Wall for the James Bond film Spectre. The haunting ballad not only topped the UK charts, but earned Sam both an Academy Award and a Golden Globe for Best Original Song. Standing on the Oscar stage, statue in hand, they quoted Ian McKellen, declaring themselves the first openly gay man to win the award, a statement later corrected, but one that made headlines and sparked conversations. Publicly, the image was flawless. A young artist at the peak of their powers, collecting accolades and commanding stages across continents. Privately, however, Sam wrestled with the same contradictions that had shadowed them from the beginning. They were living their dream, but not yet living fully as themselves. It was becoming clear that the next chapter of their life and career would require more than just beautiful songs. It would require truth. Fame has a strange way of magnifying both the beauty and the fragility of a person's life. For Sam Smith, the glow of success was dazzling, but behind it lay the quiet ache of a love story that had no safe place to exist. Much of In the Lonely Hour was written for one man, a friend and muse who, as Sam has openly shared, did not return their feelings. The heartbreak was real, and it lingered like a shadow over their earliest years in the public eye. Sam's lyrics became a diary of longing and rejection, but the pronouns were carefully altered, edited for a world still hesitant to embrace queer love stories in mainstream pop. In private, Sam was discovering the joys and the sharp edges of romance. There were moments of pure connection, late-night conversations, secret walks through quiet streets, touches that spoke more than words. But there was also the constant calculation. Would this be seen? Would someone talk? Could a photograph taken by the wrong person undo everything? The industry had its own unspoken rules. For queer artists, particularly those on the brink of global superstardom, there was an expectation to keep relationships vague or invisible. The narrative of a heterosexual pop idol was still seen as more marketable in certain circles, and breaking that illusion could mean risking airplay, sponsorships, and media support. Sam, who had already lived years of hiding parts of themselves, found the weight exhausting. There were so many moments, they would later admit, where I wanted to walk hand in hand with someone I loved, but I felt like the world would punish me for it. The pressure extended beyond love. As their fame grew, so did scrutiny over their appearance, clothing, and body. Red carpet photos were dissected online, outfits judged not just for style, but for how closely they aligned with traditional gender norms. A suit that was too fitted, a shirt that was too sheer, everything became a statement. whether intended or not. And yet, in quieter ways, Sam was already pushing back. Their style began to shift, inching toward the fluidity they felt inside. Silk shirts replaced stiff jackets. Jewelry became bolder. There were whispers in the press about their sexuality and, more subtly, about their gender expression. But rather than shut down the conversation, Sam let it simmer, waiting for the moment when they could speak on their own terms. Love, during these years, was both a sanctuary and a risk. There were relationships that nurtured them, brief romances that burned bright and fast, and painful endings that left scars. Each one added to the emotional depth of their music. Songs like Too Good at Goodbyes carried the ache of vulnerability, the fear of being hurt, and the habit of leaving before being left. Through it all, Sam remained hyper-aware of the tightrope they were walking. A celebrated artist with a private truth still shielded from the full glare of the spotlight. But the more they lived and the more they loved, the harder it became to keep those truths from spilling out. By 2014, Sam had come out publicly as gay in interviews, a move that was both liberating and frightening. The response was largely positive, yet there was still the lingering reality that being openly queer in the music industry came with invisible ceilings. The songs remained coded, the pronouns often bent to fit expectation. But something inside them was shifting. They had embraced their sexuality publicly. Now, the deeper and more complex truth, the one about gender, was beginning to rise to the surface. And once it did, there would be no turning back. In September 2019, Sam Smith opened their phone, took a deep breath, and typed the words that would send ripples across the music world. After a lifetime of being at war with my gender, I've decided to embrace myself for who I am, inside and out. I am changing my pronouns to they, them. It was not an announcement designed for headlines or shock value. It was a deeply personal declaration, one born from years of quiet reflection, therapy, and the courage to speak a truth that had lived unspoken for too long. For Sam, this was not a reinvention, it was a homecoming to the self they had always known. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. Millions of fans flooded social media with messages of love, pride, and solidarity. But alongside that outpouring came waves of misunderstanding, mockery, and outright hostility. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Some praised Sam for their bravery, others questioned their motives, belittled their identity, or refused to respect their pronouns. The press amplified it all. Headlines swung between celebration and controversy. Late-night talk shows cracked jokes. Opinion pieces debated whether non-binary was a legitimate identity. And in the middle of it, Sam, already sensitive by nature, found themselves carrying the weight of both adoration and rejection. I was terrified, they would later say. It felt like the entire world was watching me learn to walk again. In the days following the announcement, even small interactions became charged. Misgendering was frequent, sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate. Every interview, every public appearance was scrutinized for signs of change. What they wore, how they stood, how they spoke. The simple act of existing as themselves became a political statement. Yet there was no going back. Sam had chosen authenticity over comfort, and the result was both freeing and exhausting. They began speaking more openly in interviews about the nuances of being non-binary, about feeling just as much a woman as a man, and often neither. About the joy of exploring femininity without losing their masculinity. about the loneliness of existing in a world that demands certainty. The music too began to shift. In this period, Sam leaned further into gender expression through their art. Costumes became more fluid, more daring. Music videos embraced androgyny and sensuality. Songs carried layers of self-exploration that felt bolder, sharper, more unapologetic. But even as they embraced this new chapter, Sam was not immune to the toll it took. The backlash was relentless at times. Social media, once a place to connect with fans, became a minefield of criticism. Paparazzi photos were dissected for evidence of change, as though their body and clothing were public property. The mental strain was real. Sam admitted to moments of deep anxiety, days where the pressure to educate, to defend, to stand tall felt impossible. There were also whispers in the industry, concerns that the announcement might alienate parts of their audience, that radio stations in more conservative markets would quietly step back. And while some opportunities did fade, others grew. LGBTQ+ organizations embraced Sam as a powerful voice for visibility. Younger fans, many of them struggling with their own identities, wrote letters saying that Sam's courage had given them the language and the permission to live as themselves. In the storm of reaction, one thing became clear. Sam had become more than a singer. They were now a symbol, a figure who embodied both the beauty and the burden of being openly non-binary in a world still learning what that means. It was a role they had not necessarily sought, but one they chose to honor on stage, in interviews, and in the quiet moments when a single conversation with a fan could mean everything. After the storm of their public coming out, Sam Smith found themselves in unfamiliar territory, not on stage, but in silence. The relentless pace of touring, the noise of social media, and the weight of being a symbol for millions had left them drained, their creative spark flickering under the strain. For someone whose life had been measured in concerts, interviews, and chart positions, stepping away felt like disappearing. One day, their Instagram feed was filled with behind-the-scenes tour photos. The next, it was quiet. There were no press appearances, no new singles, no red carpet moments. Sam had retreated into the privacy they once thought impossible. But behind that absence was not idleness, it was survival. The months following their pronoun announcement had brought a barrage of criticism that cut deep, misgendering, ridicule, and the constant demand to explain themselves wore them down in ways even they hadn't anticipated. Anxiety became a constant companion. Nights were sleepless, haunted by overthinking. Days felt heavy, their energy consumed by the effort to simply exist. Close friends noticed the change. Conversations turned quieter, smiles slower to appear. Sam began speaking openly with their inner circle about the toll fame had taken not just on their mental health, but on their relationship with music itself. What had once been a sanctuary now carried the echoes of expectation and judgment. In interviews much later, Sam would admit that they'd considered walking away entirely. "I thought maybe I wasn't built for this," they said, "that maybe my voice was meant for small rooms, not the whole world." Therapy became a lifeline. For the first time in years, they had space to process without the glare of public opinion. They journaled, they cooked, they went days without makeup or performance clothes, letting themselves be ordinary, and in those quiet days, they began to heal. Yet, stepping away from the spotlight also meant confronting the fear of being forgotten. Would fans still care if they were gone too long? Would the industry move on without them? These questions lingered, but Sam chose to trust that the right time to return would reveal itself, and that when it did, they would come back not as a version shaped by pressure, but as the truest version of themselves. It would take months before the spark began to return. In that time, they rediscovered the joy of singing purely for themselves, in their living room, with no cameras, no stage lights, just voice and emotion. The silence that had once felt like exile began to feel like freedom. When Sam Smith finally returned to the public eye, it was not with a cautious step, but with a bold stride. The months of silence had transformed them. They emerged not as an artist trying to fit into the industry's mold, but as someone who had outgrown it entirely. The world first glimpsed this new chapter through the single Love Me More, a song that was as much a self-affirmation as it was a message to listeners. It spoke of reclaiming one's worth, of finding beauty in the very things that once felt like flaws. The track was softer than a battle cry, but its quiet confidence resonated deeply with fans who had watched Sam's journey unfold. Then came Gloria. Released in 2023, the album was an explosion of freedom genre, blending, unapologetic, and drenched in the colors of queer joy. It moved effortlessly from gospel-infused ballads to dance floor anthems, from tender confessions to bold declarations of desire. Sam's voice, always powerful, now carried something new, the sound of someone entirely at home in their own skin. Unholy, the electrifying collaboration with Kim Petras, became the unexpected global hit of the era. Its seductive beat and subversive narrative catapulted it to the top of the Billboard Hot 100, making history. Sam became the first openly non-binary artist to hold the #1 spot, while Kim became the first openly transgender woman to do the same. When they took the stage together at the Grammys, bathed in red light and surrounded by theatrical flames, it was more than a performance, it was a statement. A reclamation of space that had so often been denied to artists like them. But the return wasn't just about chart positions. Sam had grown into a new role: advocate, mentor, and symbol of possibility. They began collaborating with LGBTQ+ organizations, lending their voice and visibility to campaigns for equality. In interviews, they spoke candidly about the ongoing struggles of being non-binary in a world that still struggles to understand, but also about the joy of living authentically. Their performances became more theatrical, more fluid, more them. Wardrobes shimmered with sequins, leather, lace, sometimes all in the same outfit. They embraced makeup and genderless styling not as costume, but as armor. Fans, especially young queer listeners, began showing up to shows in their own bold expressions, inspired by the permission Sam had given them. Even the music videos reflected this liberation. Visuals were rich with symbolism, scenes of rebirth, transformation, and unapologetic sensuality. Each release felt like another layer of constraint being peeled away, revealing the artist Sam had always wanted to be. Through it all, Sam never lost sight of the fans who had carried them through the quiet years. Meet and greets turned into heartfelt conversations. Letters from teenagers discovering their identity, from parents learning to support their queer children, poured in. Sam often said those messages mattered more than any award. The comeback was not about proving their worth to the industry, it was about proving to themselves that living fully was worth any cost. And in doing so, they gave something priceless to others, a blueprint for courage. Sam Smith's influence reaches far beyond the music charts. They have become a cultural touchstone, a living reminder that authenticity can be both radical and deeply human. In an industry where image often overshadows truth, Sam has carved out a space where vulnerability is power and self-expression is a form of resistance. For the LGBTQ+ community, particularly those who identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming, Sam's visibility has been a revelation. Representation matters, and seeing someone with global recognition openly navigate life outside the traditional gender binary has provided comfort, validation, and hope. Young fans have spoken about how Sam's journey helped them find the courage to come out, to try on clothes they once feared, or simply to imagine a future where they could exist without apology. Their impact is also evident within the music industry itself. Sam's commercial success has challenged outdated notions about marketability, proving that authenticity does not limit an artist's reach, it can expand it. Labels and producers are now more willing to invest in openly queer and non-binary talent, citing Sam's career as proof that the audience is ready and eager for diverse stories. Artists across genres have acknowledged Sam's influence. Fellow musicians have praised their vocal mastery, emotional depth, and refusal to conform. Kim Petras, their Unholy collaborator, described working with Sam as standing beside someone who makes you feel like you're allowed to take up space. Sam's impact extends into fashion, where their gender-fluid style has inspired designers to think beyond binary collections. Red carpet appearances that once drew criticism for defying convention are now celebrated in fashion editorials as bold statements of identity and artistry. But perhaps the most profound part of Sam's legacy lies in the conversations they have sparked. By speaking openly about their gender identity, mental health, and the realities of fame, they have encouraged more honest dialogue around topics often shrouded in stigma. Their interviews have been studied in classrooms, quoted in think pieces, and shared across social media as rallying cries for acceptance and understanding. Sam has also used their platform to highlight issues beyond their personal story, supporting initiatives for LGBTQ+ youth homelessness, advocating for mental health awareness, and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities within the queer spectrum. In doing so, they have expanded the definition of what it means to be an artist, not just a performer, but a force for change. Even if one day the music fades from the charts, Sam's influence will remain in the countless lives they've touched, in every young person who dares to live authentically, in every artist who refuses to compromise their truth, in every fan who, hearing Sam's voice, feels less alone. This is the legacy of Sam Smith. Not only the songs that will be sung for decades, but the courage they've lent to a generation. The stage is quiet now. The final note has faded, and Sam Smith stands in the glow of the spotlight, breathing in the silence that follows. It is in these moments after the applause, after the chaos, that the truth feels clearest. Sam's journey has been one of music, yes, but also of becoming. From a small-town child with a voice too big to hide, to a global star with a truth too important to silence, their life is a testament to the courage it takes to live without compromise. They have sung about longing, about heartbreak, about joy and freedom, not as separate chapters, but as threads woven into one tapestry. Looking back, it's hard to separate the artist from the person, the songs from the life that inspired them. Every lyric carries a piece of their story. the ache of unspoken love, the triumph of self-acceptance, the resilience found in vulnerability. And perhaps that is why their music resonates so deeply. It isn't built on perfection, but on honesty. In interviews, Sam often returns to one simple idea. No one should have to live in fear of being themselves. It's a sentiment that sounds obvious, but for so many remains a distant dream. Through their voice and their visibility, Sam has helped bring that dream closer. There is still work to be done. The world is not always kind to those who live outside its neat categories. But Sam's story offers a kind of map, not a perfect one, but one marked by courage, missteps, and moments of breathtaking authenticity. It tells us that freedom is not a destination, but a practice. That we can love ourselves even as we keep growing, even as we keep learning. And so, as the lights dim and the curtain falls, Sam leaves us with more than melodies. They leave us with a question that lingers long after the last chord. What would your life look like if you lived it without apology? For some, that answer will come slowly, in small acts of bravery. For others, it might roar into the world in one bold declaration. But if Sam Smith's journey has shown us anything, it's that the act of becoming yourself is worth every step, every stumble, every song. Because in the end, the truest glory isn't in the awards or the records broken, it's in the freedom to stand in your own skin and say, "This is me."